Glenburg Schools Board of Education Workshop 1589 is called to order. Dr. Lake, do we have any changes to the agenda?
We do not.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Motion by Megan, second by Andrew. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0, and we will move on to our discussion topics, Compass Goals, and I believe Dr. Lake is
Sure.
going to introduce it.
So just to refresh everybody's memory, each year we do 4 to 5 workshops and update the community and the board on our goals that we set up each year. Our strategic plan is our 30,000-foot view of the work we want to do in the district, and then our Compass plan gets into the details and the accountability. With our strategic plan, so go to the next slide, Colin, for me. Next slide. So when you look at that, each of these workshops, we have teaching and learning give an update on goals, human resources, business and finance, and communication. And so just to remind the community, we are finishing up this 5-year strategic plan, and we are in the process of adopting a new one, which will come to the board as a draft next month, and then for approval in March. So next slide, Colin. All right, so just if you go to the website and you look at our document, you can see the color coding there. So basically, we wanted our Compass plan to be a living document. So a lot of times people write a strategic plan or they set goals and it becomes a stagnant document. It sits on the shelf or it sits somewhere. We want it to be evolving and changing to meet the needs and to be able to pivot when we need to. So with that, I believe Joelle is up first, and she just ran out the dais. All righty then. So she's got her notes. So anyway, so Joelle typically gets to go last, but she's going first tonight. So we're going to kick off with some updates around finance and operations.
Okay, yes, sorry, I had meetings up to the point and had to grab my notes. As we close out a project, last project on the list, we have a parking lot. Does everyone say, that's the sign that we are rolled out of a long process, and in fact, getting ready to move forth to another one. Dr. Lake talked about the strategic plan in a 5-year, and we're ending that 5-year. And we're getting ready to develop a new one. So capital projects is an area that we've been working hard on for quite a few years. I'm going to talk about that. But the recap of the steps and the work by many to get here, it's a good exercise to look back before we move forward to our next project and reflect or recap on how not just our norm of how, what, and why we got there, but who. So I think all of that is important as we have a initiative on our April ballot. So this is the slide that when I first put it together, I was like, God, I thought this was taking a long time, but it has taken a long time. We started working on this, these capital improvements that have been made across the district in 2018. We first step, and I'm not going to go through each of these, but highlight. In 2018, our task was one, to get an architect on board. And all of that requires bidding and statute on how you hire people. We have strict policies with school districts on contracts and bidding. And so we had to go through that exercise, which again, we're doing again because we're getting ready to start a new project. We did a bid or an RFQ on a financial advisor and bond counsel to start somebody that's going to help us manage our money, that knows all of the details around municipal financing, knows all of the legal things of closing on bonds, just like when you go to the bank and close on a home loan, there's all that paperwork and legal things that have to be filed to make it, legal. And then, so that was our first step in 2018. And then in 2019 is when we went to the public and put something on the election. At that time, we wanted to think about, through our Compass goals, one of our major headers is, resources. It's either how do we get more funding or how do we reduce expenditures? So as you're going into a project, just imagine you're building your own home too. You've got a bid from a contractor, and then you can think, well, how else are there other resources I can fund? Schools are lucky, we get grants and those type of things. But one of the unique things that's in the statute for schools to use is performance contracting. And that is, we went out to bid and had a committee on that. Mike sat on that committee. That is our energy savings. I'm looking at the equipment in our buildings that has not been updated a while and that's costing us more to run. So we went through that process according to our policy and statute. And there is like I said, a statute for school districts just on performance contracting, our ESCO savings. And the way you fund that is through COPS. So we did an RFP, looked for vendors. We had a lot of vendors bid. Everybody wants to work for Lindbergh, I'll tell you that. So I bid that, and we went through a process to pick the top vendor, which we've been very happy with them. And that was, to, again, provide more money to finish the big projects. If you can get some dollars here to pay for your energy or your infrastructure or your boilers and your lighting, then we don't have to take that out of the bond funds, and we can do more improvements with it. So we did that, and then right after that is when we went to the voters for the prop. So the items on here really talk about in that year the things that we started with. And again, I won't go through every one of them. I'll let you read it. But the support center was the first one, and I will talk about that because that one, we had to have some place for all our facilities crew and all of them to get off the high school campus. If you reflect back all the way to 2018, we were on the high school campus. The facilities guys were on the high school campus. All their trucks were on the high school campus. Everybody was housed there. And as you look out to where we are now, just imagine if we had to go back to that point. It wasn't a good thing. So one of the first things was to get everybody off of that so we could make our improvements. And that's another thing that we did in 2019 was find the Watson property, and that was really our first Prop R 2019 purchase. Right as soon as we got the money in the bank, we bought some property. So then you go through 20, 21, and 22, and it talks about the things at the high school and at the other buildings that we did in that timeline that we talked to taxpayers about when we went out for our bond referendum. We did get a surprise early on in the high school project, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too, but there was a need to fund a big surprise. And so that happened in 2020. Was it 2020 or 2021? Looks like we did that in 2021. We did that. And then I think everybody else can go through this up till today. We actually stopped on here with August when school started, but we all know there was another 6-month process to get to this point in time. But it's been a long time coming. So the next slide is where, the money girl can talk, because I'm going to talk money here. All of this, over that time period from 2018 till now, the sources of funding, how did we come to get all of this accomplished at this time? Number one, our biggest dollar amount in funding was our Prop R bond proceeds, which was $116 million. When you look at that number, we're looking at interest and everything that we earned over that period of time. So that's all of the revenue coming in. I will tell you, we didn't earn a lot of interest on our Prop R 2019 proceeds because, as you know, we went through Prop R construction during, I'm not going to say the word, but the pandemic. And so costs were higher, revenue was lower due to interest things. And so this is all counting all the revenue that we used in that, which is interest. Then we talked a little bit about, we're going to put on here our ESCO funding. The ESCO funding is the COPS on our performance contracting, which is a project that over time you're going to pay yourself back because you're saving from operations. If you put solar on your roof or you do something like that, in a long time your bills are going to go down and you're going to have funding in the pocket. And so the state, through their statute, allows us to borrow against our future savings. And so that was $10,343,000 and touched pretty much every building except the newer buildings, which was central office and Dressel. There was enough improvements in our buildings on HVAC equipment, lighting, water, and that's what we paid for with that. So instead of taking that out of bond money, we had another resource that we're going to pay ourselves back with. Excuse me.
Joelle, since you had a pause there, can you talk about the premium on the 160?
Okay, the premium, yeah.
Because the initiative was 105 million,
Yeah.
but also talk about the
So
interest,
it's
but talk
and the
about the premium as well.
And our people over here can talk about that really, but when you look at bonds for school districts. It's municipal bonds, and they're tax exempt. So they are very popular in the marketplace. And so if you look at how the housing market worked, when people were trying to buy housing, they were paying premiums to get a house. On these type of bonds, most often, the investor will pay a little bit more to get that bond because it's tax exempt. Because they want that tax exempt bond in their portfolio, because that's gonna save them more than the premium they pay to get it. People are out there fighting. We do all of our bond sales competitively, and you can see the number of companies that try to buy them. And the investors want to pay more because they want that in their portfolio to sell it to their investors because it's very popular. So I don't know if municipal bonds ever don't sell at a premium. I'm pretty there's a time, but most often people are ready to buy them. And so we never know what that dollar number is going to be until we sell them competitively and see what the market is. I do have to say that we do, with our financial advisor and our bond counsel, put a limit on that. We don't want to take everything we can on a bid. We're going to put a reasonable limit on that sale just to do the right thing and be fiscally responsible. So we do put a limit. I can't remember what it is. It might be 10%. The audience says it's 10%. We would never go above a 10% premium. And some people are willing to pay that, but that's just not the right thing to do for fiscal responsibility. Is that good for you? Yes. Okay. The next part in here, you'll get a little more detail, I think, about why increased scope happened. The main reason we went out to look for more funding at this point in the game was we had a big surprise with our permitting process and the new rules. We went into the prop with a certain code, and we're pretty much promised that that code wasn't going to change. But it did change, and there was new requirements from the county on what we had to do. One of the biggest was the storm shelter. So it was the storm shelter and the extra gym, which is not really on the list to begin with. So at that time, the board sat down together and talked about, we're having to go back out. What do we want to do with the campus? Since we're going back out to borrow, and we're going to do this through COPS, which they're going to talk about is a financing tool used by districts across the state. In addition to bonds. We went back out and talked about were there other things that we're not going to be able to get accomplished at the high school, and we want to get done so that when we're finished with that facility and that campus, we don't have to start all back over. I mean, they've gone through a lot. Where's Eric? Okay, he could step up and testify about how long this project has been, and we don't really want to go back. But the results are amazing. The amounts are amazing, so it always looks like that on the other side. So that was our increased scope. So we went back out to, went to our financial advisor, and we looked at, our debt, where we are at with our debt, and we issued COPs, which are certificates of participation, to borrow to, one, cover our surprise, and two, to just finish the project at the high school. So that was $12 million.
Joel, can I just jump in on that surprise? So Joel mentioned it, but when we did our due diligence around what code will be required to build this new building on, and we were told 2009 code. Well, there was a thing called the pandemic that happened that slowed permitting down. We had to have our permit in our hand, I believe, by July 1st of 2020. Well, you know what was going on at that time. So we really didn't have much of a choice, and so we had to move forward with the project. We were hoping to we kept that gymnasium. We built a gymnasium storm shelter, and we really tried to keep that cost to a minimum. But as Joelle said, since we had that surprise and we had other things that we would like to do on that high school campus, we went out and increased the scope of work, basically, is what we did. So
yeah, I should have I think I did put that word on my timeline, because it would have looked a lot different, I think, if we wouldn't have had that surprise, because our revenue was less than we thought it would be as far as on our interest side, and our expenditures and our timeline, because of labor shortages and, just products not getting to us, was exacerbated. We probably would have been done a year ago and had the parking lot done a year ago at this time, but whatever. And then the next one is what I just talked about, was our energy saving rebate. Oh, these are the rebates. So in addition to the ESCO, which is statute, we had rebates because we were improving equipment in our buildings that hadn't been updated in a long time. With that comes some Ameren likes that. They like when you are more efficient in your building, because the grid doesn't get so overburdened and everybody pays more. So with that, ESCO, and they helped us with that on writing the rebate data. McClure was also a part of that. When the project was finished, and this was just recently, we just got checks from Ameren which were rebates to say thank you for doing energy improvements. You're saving not just yourself money, but all of the energy cost, and those were cash, so we put those in the bank. So I count that towards project. I mean, we pretty much spent our money by the time we got that, but you can go back and that covers our project. So the total cost over 2018 to this current year was about $140 million in revenue, as that's what we've spent on projects. So, any questions with that?
So anytime you do one of these, it's not like you just make a decision, oh, we're gonna go get this COPS. It's something that you work with council on, and then the board had to approve it.
Well, the board is a key player in that. It's not like I make a decision to go finance something and Dr. Lake. We work with the board on the idea. I mean, there are, like I said, schools are highly regulated. We have our policy, we have state statute, pretty much everything we do, there's a process. Sometimes I will tell you work with vendors and they're like, why is this taking so long? Well, there's a lot of process and rules and regulations on how schools manage their money and how they borrow money. As you know, with our funds, we have a debt service fund that's totally separate from our operating fund, and that has rules of its own. And that's not just like look at our debt today and look at it in 5 years. We're constantly working with our financial advisors, keeping up with the market. And over the course of this, one of the things I could have put in here was during that 2018 to now, we also did a lot of refunding or refinancing, because what was good through the pandemic was borrowing interest rates. So, one of the items that is a good reflection that I probably should have put on here, it's not operating money. We couldn't use it for projects, but it was refinancing our debt to some of the lowest rates ever. I know a lot of people refinanced their houses at that time too. And that was savings on our debt side. We can't use that savings to pay salaries. We can't use that savings to build a building. But, when you pay down your debt, it gives you an opportunity you'll have more equity to do something sooner. So going out to the April issue and the amount of money that we can borrow in April is a result of that is because we've refinanced and have lower interest rates because of.
It was, Joel, if I remember right, it was around $10 million, I think,
Yeah.
is what we saved in interest. Don't
And
hold me
debt,
exactly
yeah.
to that amount, but it was in that
Yeah,
range.
it was substantial.
Yeah.
It was substantial. So it's not, like I said, it's not a time of the year we talk about this. We're constantly talking about what the market is and how we can, do things to generate revenue or save expenditures. But that was one on there. Next slide. Okay, so this is just kind of, I went into the detail a little bit, but on the first part of this, capital improvement funding use one was, of course, our Prop 2019. And the major projects in this were the high school addition and renovation, which is easy to see that when you want to see the results of your work, just walk through the high school or just pick up the phone. Everybody wants to come visit, or they want to rent a space, and we can easily see that. Sports center purchase and renovation, we have that over there now. I guess people see it more often because now they're going to the fancy, all the fancy places over there. There's no longer Crestwood Mall that isn't, our facility is right across from that. So you can see that, and you can also see that our people are off the campus. And secure vestibules, that's very visible as well, and it's the safety of our students. So this was what primarily the funding for Prop R was. Next, Dr. Lake, you can talk about the pictures. You're good at that.
Okay, so this is if you haven't been in the new high school, this is the lobby, the main entrance into the new high school. Those are actually our students in those pictures. This is, I think from our architect, they did, this is when they came in and did their professional photos. Next slide. And then to the left there was the support service center, originally what it looked like. And then in the back, the middle picture is kind of the front of the building. We had to do some outside work with that building. We found some surprises there, like oil for an old boiler that was not on anyone's map that we had to find, and work with the EPA on that to remediate that. And then you can see that picture to the right is kind of the warehouse area. Next slide. And these are our secure vestibules. If you remember, the only secure vestibules in the district were at Concord, Dressel, and Sappington. And so we wanted to have that same standard across our district with Prop R to put that secure vestibule. The doors were locked at the other schools before we put the secure vestibule in, but you were buzzed into the building and then you immediately had access to students, which is not best practice. What the secure vestibule does is it allows you to control points of entry into your building. So we did those there as well. You go back one sec, I'll put a plug in. So you see the nice secure vestibule at Truman right there. In the next prop, if we're successful, we'll get rid of those window air conditioners at Truman, which needs a complete facelift. That is a big project in the potential passage of Prop R in April.
We could probably gain some efficiencies in electric bills
Yeah, we
there,
might
too.
save some money and some
That's why it's
electric
never stagnant at the
efficiencies as
beginning,
well. So that's true. Next slide. All right, Joelle.
So the next slide, if anybody wants to look up that statute, the statute that is in regard to using guaranteed energy savings, the state pre-funding that, allowing you to borrow against the future, this is the statute, and then it has how we can fund that in there. So this was 10.3 million, and we talked about how that impacted, by funding that through a separate funding source, we were able to get more out of our bond money. And this has really been a passion project, I would say. We have a great team that we worked with Navitas, and every time that they come and present to us about what's happening in our buildings and the energy we're saving, I also have to, on this one, really thank our buildings and the staff there. We've done a lot of communication about how energy works, how to use your, I always forget what it's called in your room, your little up and down thing, thermometer, your thermostat, but they've come to embrace it. The buildings have, they understand it. We've changed processes, and really without staff jumping on board, I mean, we put the equipment in place, but another part of this is just engaging staff, and they've been very helpful.
Joelle, can I just jump in? Just one thing I want to highlight when she's talking about processes is our buildings used to be constantly running. They didn't have an occupied and an unoccupied mode, which now with these new controls allows us to save that money. And what I would love to say is that we were hoping before the pandemic that we would actually see these savings in our ongoing budget, but what it's allowing us to do is where other school districts in a lot of places are seeing big increases in their electric bills and things like that, we are not. We are staying revenue neutral with that because of this work as well. So I think that's important.
Yep, it is, and we have that team on to continue looking at optimization. The high school was under construction, so high school wasn't part of any of this energy savings performance, but they got all new equipment with the bond issue, and so now we're working with our energy team to get them on the processes that can continue that savings. But yes, energy rates continue to rise, and this is helping us stay level. So that's what that story is. Pictures of the nice, pretty equipment. I don't have Scott here, do I, to talk about all this pretty equipment? Okay.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. All right.
Okay. And the final source here, we talk about that increased scope. And again, the lead on this, and Dr. Lake already talked about it, was the storm shelter surprise and how long it took to get a permit because everybody was shut down and how expenses went up. But we got something out of it. We got a nice pretty gym that we didn't plan on over there. So we, that was a little bit over $4 million to get that done. And so we were going out to do a financing, and the board sat down at that point as a group and just really talked about, well, if we're going to go out to get financing, I mean, there are costs to financing. It's not free, and every time we do a financing, I have to sit down with a credit agency and be grilled about our finances. And we always do well. I'll talk a little bit about that, but there's work and there's time and there's a cost to financing. So it's not something you want to do every other day. So what did we need at the high school that we hadn't planned for? And one really big thing that wasn't planned for was the Gifted Education Center. And again, that's one that I think people can see and can understand the value afterwards. You want to comment on this one?
Yeah, so currently, or where you have the Idea Center or Gifted Center is at the high school now in the old library. It was at Kennerly Elementary. There was a plan in the district to maybe put an addition on at Kennerly at some point to absorb the growth that will happen and free up those classrooms at Kennerly. We felt like, when we went to the board and we knew we were going to go out, we felt like this was a better way to do that, to maximize that space. That idea came from, I'll give Ms. Watts the idea in a programming meeting about what could we do with that high school, because in the high school programming, we weren't sure what we wanted to do with it. We just knew it was a unique building that was a part of South County for a long time, and so very happy to be able to do that. And then when we were going out for that money, we talked about additional parking on our high school and what could that look like. And so redoing the tennis courts into parking and then putting new tennis courts where the softball field was, and then having a multi-use softball, baseball field as well. So it really maximized and finished out a big part of that high school campus. And the conversation was, we've been on there, we could wait until the next prop and then go back on and be under construction again, or do we want to go borrow the money now and hopefully in our next bond we can be successful? And that is part of the prop in April, is to pay off this borrowed money as well. So.
Yep. And a lot happened on the high school campus, but I do know that those buildings that those programs came out of that were maxed out with space, Kennerly and Spearing, they had split programming. Those kids were at different facilities. They weren't all in one. And it was taking up space in the buildings that they have flown into, and their programming is much better because they're not housing that program. So some of these positives just didn't happen at the high school. The positives helped the other buildings be better.
And Joelle,
Pictures, yep.
I'll just comment on our big mistake.
Yeah.
We're
Wasn't our mistake. You
surprised.
say that was not our mistake.
Yeah, no mistake,
Surprise.
surprise.
I think
That was
Dr.
St. Louis County's
Cochran,
mistake. No, just a second.
Dr. Cochran will agree with me that it was divine intervention, because I'm not sure how we'd function without the third jump.
Well, I agree with that. When you reflect on it afterwards, when you get past the emotion of, you told us we were gonna not have to do this, and, but when you have a project that stretches over 3 to 4 years, things happen. I mean, if we got a project started today and finished it in 6 months, we could be pretty set on what's going to happen, and then don't throw up a pandemic in the middle of it.
Well, I
either.
don't think this would be a surprise to anybody, but we worked with St. Louis County and the inspector. We actually started moving dirt and pouring foundations before we actually even got the permit later at the end of 2020, towards November, December, I think, is when we finally got that, but they were able to work with us. That's how far behind they were on the permitting process. And in order to be on the 2009 code, you had to have that in hand by July 1st of 2020, so.
Next slide with some pretty pictures. Dr. Lake.
So this is the surprise, not the mistake, the surprise gym that we call the Green Gym. If you've been around the district for a while, the kids and Dr. Cochran and staff, we weren't going to have Gym 4. I couldn't do that, so we decided to rename them. So we have the Green Gym, which is the new gym because it's new, so it's green. And then the Gold Gym is the old Gym 2, and then Gym 3 is the Flyers Gym. So this is a picture of our new Green Gym. Next slide. And then this is the new tennis courts. Where the tennis courts are sitting is where the old softball field used to be, and now our baseball field is now a softball baseball field. We play softball. If you're not familiar with that, we play softball in the fall in Missouri, which is awesome. We have a temporary fence that we can set out there and the pitching mounds and be able to host. We hosted a lot of games. Anytime there's rain, we get games moved to us, which saves us in transportation costs, but it costs us more in officials. So I think the transportation cost is better. So next slide. And then this is inside the Idea Center, which is our gifted center, which is the old library. I think the feedback from families and students and staff there is that the kids are really thriving in this space. And it's so fun. All of a sudden, you'll see this line of elementary kids marching through the high school to go do recess inside at the gym, one of the gyms, or going to eat. So it's kind of fun to have them on the campus there. Next slide.
I'm gonna go back to the other one just to close up before I invite our guest up. So I kind of started with how, what, and why. You know, those are our things that we use for compass goals and how we work with our strategic plan. But I said, really, this was a lot of who, you know. And the main who on this is our board who had forward thinking, and it was student-minded forward thinking. So all the financing, all the things that come in the middle, it started with an idea of how can we improve student learning, how can we improve student spaces, and not even just improve in this project, we went above and beyond on student spaces, thanks to Tara and her team, Dr. Lake, and all of the buildings who went out on tours and looked at other buildings, but it's the who with how can we improve student spaces improve student learning, and a board that was willing to have these conversations and work on time over a 6-year period with a lot of unique financings, a lot of policies to follow, a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross. And so I really want to thank the vision from Dr. Lake and the board, because it wouldn't have happened without you. So on that note, another who, we have some other who's over here. Not the who's like on the Grinch or anything, but some other who's. Another team that we could not do it without. I mean, I'm a CPA, have my MBA and all of that, but municipal financing and bond attorney closing on bonds, it's a special skill set that I'm glad that I have a team that we went out to bid and hired these teams early on in the process before we started Prop 2019. And they dot our I's and cross our T's for us. And there's ongoing compliance, not just when you issue a bond, you've issued the bond and you're done. There's annual compliance. There's things that we have to do. They help us monitor how much interest you earn, because on bonds you can only earn so much interest because you're not going to borrow money to make money on it. So without this team and these who's, I couldn't do it. And they have their eyes out for our board and all of our taxpayers. So I'd like to welcome you guys up. And they're going to do a very quick, I know this could be boring, the financing part, but I got to go first. So you guys want to sit there? That's fine. Talk about this section.
Did you introduce
Yes, I will
the
introduce them.
company? Yeah.
We have Jason Terry and Hannah. I know you got married and I can't remember your last name.
Snyder.
Hannah Snyder, that's right, I didn't want to say it wrong. Hannah Snyder. Hannah's from Piper Sanders, which is our municipal financial advisor.
Yep.
And then Todd is not here, he's another one. Jason Terry is from Gilmore Bell, and his kids use our campus a lot, playing ball and everything, so he sees, wow, this is what you spent your money on, and his boys like it. So go ahead, guys.
Okay. I think I'm first. So again, I'm Hannah Snyder with Piper Sandler, and we serve as the district's financial advisor. So we basically help the district come up with financial plans to fund the capital improvement projects that were just discussed. The financial advisor does have a fiduciary responsibility to the district, and it's the only party that is part of the bond issuance process that has that responsibility. So any advice we're providing is always in the best interest of the district, and we always go through multiple solutions and options to ultimately match the district's long-term and short-term goals. So some other added benefits of a financial advisor is that when you do have a financial advisor involved with the bond issuance process, you're adding competition and transparency to the whole process. That's kind of a very high level of the benefits of a municipal advisor. So going from there, I'll kind of talk about how it adds competition. And one example is the method of sale that we actually sell the bonds. So for each debt financing, the district has historically gone through a competitive sale process. So all that means is that when we're ready to price the bonds, we send out the information about the debt to all bond underwriters and market investors and market participants all across the country. And then we set up a specific day and time for them to submit their pricing proposal. And then we simply just select the lowest cost of funds. So it's a combination of interest rates and their fees. And so we just select the underwriter that's gonna give the district the lowest cost of funds. So if you have the lowest interest rate in the current market, that means you're paying less in interest and it frees up money to spend on actual projects. So that's just one example of the added competition, and as you can see, that would also be a transparent process in how you're selecting the bond underwriter for these debt issuances. I think I'm on actually 2 more slides. The bond, yep. So one of the steps when we go through the bond issuance process is going through a bond rating. And that is just essentially kind of like a credit number for the district. So the top bond rating a municipal entity could have is AAA. And then the next best category is AA, which is what the district is in. And then it goes down to single A, triple B, and just goes down from there. So the district is in the second best category, which is really great news in terms of when you go to market to get interest rates for your bonds, you're going to be getting the lowest interest rates or some of the lowest interest rates out there when you go to price your bonds. So again, it's just kind of, we meet with.
Can I ask you just a quick question? Are there any school districts in Missouri that are triple A?
There are 11 entities that have a AAA rating out of the, I mean,
500
and that's just school districts, 500. So
Yeah.
that includes cities,
Yeah.
counties, fire districts.
Oh,
There's
only 11?
out of the entire state.
Okay.
So-
And can you briefly talk about why some ratings changed for school districts with Moody's? And just
Yeah.
quickly, just, can you
So
talk about that?
The 2 main rating agencies that we typically use for school districts is Moody's and then Standard & Poor's, or S&P. Moody's, the district had historically used Moody's, and sometimes rating agencies, they just change the way they look at certain statistics, and a lot of times it's nothing a district does. They made no changes at all, but it does happen where the rating agency just changes the way they look at things, and it will result in a bond upgrade or downgrade. So when that happens, we would look at the other options out there and just make sure we're using the rating agency that's gonna provide the most favorable rating for the district.
So I just want to ask, though, the change, though, in Moody's is because of the cash obligation with the retirement system,
Yep, and
correct?
they just
Can you
changed-
talk, can you talk about that?
specifically-
Well, how that changed, why our rating changed? Yeah.
Yep, so with Moody's, the district was specifically AA2 rated, and then Moody's changed the way they looked at the pension and how it was reported and looked at it kind of as debt of the district. So they decided to downgrade the district to AA3.
And I would say
And
it's
I'm
not
sorry.
just Lindbergh District, it was districts across
Every
everywhere.
district,
every-
yes.
Every
Yeah, it
district,
was
anywhere.
just
That's what I'm trying to get at is
methodology
that
change. It's nothing
our
the
rating
district
went
did.
down, but every school district's rating went down, and it was because of that obligation.
Their
of-
methodology
Yes,
changed, yeah, for
yes.
the retirement system, which we all are happy with. It's the
Yes,
best
it's a great retirement system.
Anywhere, it really is. They want to put all that debt on our books. And you can imagine the debt of the PSRS, Pierce Retirement System, Missouri Retirement System, listing that on your financial statements as our debt, you won't have a positive, you won't have a positive statement, so odd, because we don't have any responsibility for that debt. But that was their methodology changes. Well, we just want to put it on there, it's like, why? I know Piper Sanders and other people went out to fight that,
Well, we sat in your office with Todd
Yeah,
on a
and-
call
yeah.
with Moody's and basically explained how that was going to impact school districts
Yep.
to no fault of school districts across the state of Missouri, because we've been doing this for years, but like you said, they changed their methodology. So I want to make sure that it's clear that it was nothing that the district did to lower that rating. It was how they changed their methodology and took our amazing retirement system and put it on our books. So that's what I'm trying to get at, so.
Yep, and that's all true, and so again, nothing the district did, they just changed the way they viewed things, so we switched from Moody's to S&P because they do not view it that way, and they provided a higher rating of AA, so that's what the district is currently rated, and it's in the second best category. So you can't really do much better.
Well, and things always change, and that's why we have you guys, I mean, because they're always changing the ways they do the credit. So, I mean, we have to stay on top of it, and who knows, we can make a change again if it needs be, but it's something that you guys
Yeah, we
work with us
just
on.
ongoing monitoring, making sure we're up to date with all those different changes and keeping the district updated. So I think, unless, Joelle, you have anything to add or anyone has questions, I think Jason can take over the next few slides.
We're good, thank you.
Okay.
Can you go to the next slide, please? So, real briefly, I wanted, Jason Terry from Gilmore and Bell, you've probably seen me in a lot of meetings. And you can thank me for the huge board packets that include a 40-page bond resolution and all the other documents. What I wanted to briefly discuss was the two main financing tools that school districts have at their disposal, which is general obligation bonds and lease financings, which is kind of a broader category. I suspect you're all fairly familiar with general obligation bonds, given that the high school was just funded with general obligation bonds, and the school district's gonna go back to the voters in April for another issue of general obligation bonds. They are payable from a dedicated property tax, and that property tax can only be used to repay those bonds. And different from a lease financing, and that sometimes has slightly different structures, slightly different names, so you're probably familiar with certificates of participation, but a lease purchase agreement, we used to use leasehold revenue bonds, those all fall under the same statutory authority. Missouri law specifically provides that a school district has the ability to do these lease financings. They are what we call annual appropriations, so every year the district makes a decision to appropriate the principal and interest that are due on, and I'll say COPS, because that's what the district has right now. One thing I wanted to note, the board, just like general obligation bonds and COPS, the board makes that decision to do that financing. Sure, there's a lot of work beforehand with staff and your consultants, but ultimately the board makes the decision to move forward with that financing. And that's the case with general obligation bonds. While there is you go to the voters approve it, there will be a time when we'll be before you with a bond resolution to issue the general obligation bonds, and that will include the particular sale terms of the bonds. And that's the same with COPS. The board makes the decision to approve a COPS financing, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the district has also used a competitive sale process for the COPS, not just the general obligation bonds. Not everyone does it that way. A lot of COPS are sold via a negotiated sale, but Lindbergh has made the decision to keep that transparency process they have in place with the general obligation bonds and sell those COPS via competitive sales.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So my memory is not what Hannah's younger than me, so her memory's great. So before I really bore you about what a bond attorney does, are there any questions about the two financing tools that the district has?
I have a question. So when we go out for a bond and it gets approved, we don't just get the money. We have to actually sell these bonds in order to get the money, and then we can choose the timing in which to do that. We don't have to do it all at once.
It is a two-step, well, it could be more than, but it's a two-step process, you're right. The voters, for general obligation bonds, in April, the voters will approve your bond issue, and it's sometime after that, the board will make a decision to issue what may be all of those bonds or a portion of those bonds. So I don't remember the number offhand, but let's say $50 million of bonds. Maybe you don't need all 50 million in May of this year, so you issue 25 million. Well, we would come to the board with a bond resolution for $25 million of bonds, and that's what would be issued at that time. And that's the point that you have incurred that debt. And so the vote in April is just authority to move forward with issuing the bonds.
And Hannah and Todd help us with that strategy on what's the best way to do that. So that's why we have that financial advisor.
And that segues to the next slide. I do not give financial advice. So we are attorneys, we're lawyers, I have never been invited to a career day. And so what I do is a little mundane. We draft a lot of bond documents. Everything that the district signs, whether it's the president, secretary of the board, or the superintendent, if it's related to a bond financing, we've either drafted it or reviewed it before it's signed. We help the district from the very beginning of a bond financing process. I'll use bond financing generically now to include COPS and GO bonds. From the very beginning to closing, and closing is that day you get the money, the day the money is wired to the district. As Joelle alluded to, there are some post-compliance requirements of the district, and we help the district with those. A bond process includes a lot of state law, federal tax law, and state and federal securities law. And so we help with to make sure that the district's in compliance with every aspect from top to bottom when it comes to a bond financing. And again, later this year, if you're issuing bonds, you will see a stack of electronic documents in your board packets, and we're responsible for those. So again, I apologize ahead of time if you're reading through those. But that's our role. At the end of a transaction, we give it's a bond counsel opinion, and it's that opinion that makes your bonds marketable. When you're marketing your bonds out in the market by a public offering or competitive sale, they want to know, a buyer wants to know that you have bond counsel, who that bond counsel is, and that you have bond counsel, and that they're going to give an opinion that says the district did everything they were supposed to do to issue these bonds. And on most of your bond issues, we also include an opinion that these bonds are tax exempt. Tax exempt, which you may be familiar with, allows you to borrow at a lower rate of interest. Okay, so if I buy a Lindbergh bond, I don't have to pay taxes on the interest I earn. And so because of that, I'm willing to accept a lower rate of interest because I don't have to pay taxes. If I go buy Coca-Cola stock, well, I got to pay taxes on that. I want a higher rate of interest. So that federal subsidy, if you will, we make sure that the district has done everything so we can give that opinion, and it's that opinion that will allow you to borrow at a lower rate of interest than if you were, say, Coca-Cola. Any questions about being a bond attorney?
I don't know if mine's about being a bond attorney, but I was hearing you say how, and this might be a question for you, but how you would get approval for the bond and then maybe only sell off part of it. Would the benefit of that just be about like market rate and interest available at that time, or what's the benefit of selling off part of it rather than all of it?
There's probably a variety of different reasons you would do that, and it's all market dependent. We always also look at the project timeline. There's kind of, and Jason could probably talk more about this, but there are some certain rules that you need to spend. If you issue debt, you need to spend it, by a certain time, typically within 3 years. So we're tracking construction timelines. If we think rates will be lower this year or next year, or, if there's something in the news coming up, we might hold off. So we evaluate all of that once the bonds have been approved by voters, and just make the decision based on all those factors.
Yeah, for tax exempt bonds, there's a 3-year expectation that you spend the bond proceeds. And if you don't need, you're also incurring interest cost on that. And so if you can't spend it quickly enough, it may be, and this is not my hat, this is Hannah's hat, it may be advantageous to wait and issue some of them later. But for tax law, we always, the expectation is to be spent in 3 years. As we've seen, things happen. Pandemic, I didn't want to say COVID, so the pandemic, a lot of issuers, with all the construction delays we saw over the last few years, issuers couldn't spend their bonds within 3 years, and that those things happen, but it's an expectation at the time of issuance.
We had 2 sales, just so you know, on the last bond. We did 2 sales.
And that's true that once the bonds are approved, that's just the authorization to go ahead and move forward with issuing, and you don't owe interest and start incurring that interest until the bonds have actually been issued. So we're always just mindful of construction timelines and market environments when we make those decisions.
Anybody, any other questions? All right, thanks, guys, appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Joelle, anything else? I know, we gave her 45 minutes.
We've got our people queued up.
Good.
Okay.
But I just think it was really timely conversation with us going in the spring and what we had just done. And so just wanted to make sure we had that open conversation about it. So any questions for administration from board or anything? All right, next up, I believe.
I just want to make a comment that I think that it just shows how you go out, you get a bond, you have all this work to do, but things change, and every time there is a change, there's a process and a group of advisors, both legal and financial, helping the district make these decisions. We don't just go out and do it alone. You're not trusting me to make a decision alone. We have advisors and people that can help us make those decisions, and so I think the taxpayers can feel good that we are being diligent in how we spend the money that they give to us.
Dr. Sparks?
All right, well, I'm going to invite Dr. Ronnie Zagora up to the table. She's our Executive Director of Secondary Education, and she is leading our Diploma Plus work. So we're going to start the teaching and learning portion of tonight's workshop with her.
Here or there?
You can sit,
I've been
wherever
sitting-
you're
I'm
comfortable.
gonna stand. I've been sitting.
All
That's
day,
okay.
we've been sitting all day. I feel like we've been in every meeting together.
My part here is brief, so I don't mind.
All right, Colin, if you can go to the next slide.
All right, well, good evening. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to give an update on our Diploma Plus. So one of our Compass goals has to do with providing high-quality student experiences, and this is one way, or I should say many ways, that we are providing those experiences for our students. So our Diploma Plus, just as a reminder, we used to call these choice programs. We've sort of evolved. We call it our Diploma Plus programs now, and what these are credentials or experiences that are in addition to just the traditional high school diploma. So our goal is that our students leave high school with their diploma, but then also preparation for whatever comes next, whether that is the workplace or a 2-year college, a 4-year college, vocational school. We want them to be able to explore their interests and have some ideas and experiences that help inform where they go when they graduate from us. So this year we do have an additional course that is part of what we consider one of our Diploma Plus programs, and that is the AP Research course. So a few years ago we introduced the AP Capstone program, and that was as we phased out our International Baccalaureate program, we were phasing in the AP Capstone program. So this school year is the first year that we have offered that AP Research course. We have 12 students that are taking that this year as seniors. You can only take it as a high school senior. And that is a course that follows the AP Seminar course. And AP Seminar students can take in 10th, 11th, or 12th grade. So we currently have 33 students in our AP Seminar course. About a third of them are 10th graders, so they won't be able to take that research course for a couple more years. But this is a program that is strong and growing, and what the students are doing in those courses is really phenomenal. It is like graduate level thinking and research and writing. It's really impressive to just sit in there and hear them talk about the learning that they're doing. And so I think it's a wonderful experience that is very well-rounded for them, especially as we reflect on the fact that this is something we introduced in place of our International Baccalaureate program. The high levels of thinking that are happening in AP Capstone more than match what was happening in our IB classes. So very proud of that. As you know, our aviation program is also going very strong. So this year, the Aviation 2 course was implemented just this spring semester. We've got 31 students in Aviation 2. We have 33 students in Aviation 1, so definitely a consistent level of interest. And now with the program being more visible, they've got space to work in, and they've got some really cool equipment, and they're getting a lot of publicity. And I will say the level of interest in our community, like everyone who has ever flown a plane has come out of the woodwork to contact our aviation teacher to see how they can work with our students to build interest in aviation careers. So another program that we're really proud of. And I should add that both the AP Seminar research and research courses and aviation would be nothing without the teachers that have taken those on and invested so much time into really building high quality courses for our students. So kudos to them. And then next year we will be introducing our EMT program. So just had a meeting today to continue to iron out the details of that. That is a course that will be available to seniors next year. And when they enroll in the EMT program, they will meet the requirements of the EMT curriculum. And that, combined with some outside of school hours to finish clinicals, clinical experiences, will make those students eligible to take their national EMT exam and then get their license. And so if they meet those requirements, then they can exit high school immediately employable as an EMT in any one of the many agencies that employ them. And that's through a partnership with the Melville Fire Protection District. So Melville Fire has been wonderful in working with us to help us identify an instructor for the program, help us manage where we're going to get the equipment and how we're going to schedule all of this, and are really taking ownership of a lot of the support that we need since we're very new to this, and are walking us through that step by step. And so we're very thankful to Melville Fire and excited for what it's going to be. And the students in that EMT program will also have exposure to the fire department and will get to experience some similar experiences to what a person in the fire academy might experience. Do some field trips, visit the fire tower unit that they have. So it will also help students kind of determine where they want to go next with their EMT training, whether it's into healthcare or whether it's with the fire department or any number of places that they can go with that. And then a lot of our efforts are just in sustaining existing strong programs. We continue to try to grow our enrollment in a lot of our Diploma Plus programs. Our internships, we've got about 15 students doing internships. Early college remains very strong with about 50 students a year that are participating in early college. I reported to the board back in July on our Seal of Biliteracy program and how that continues to grow. We're sustaining about the same number of students in CAPS. We have 13 this year. Dual credit continues to just have off the charts growth. Hundreds of students earning a minimum of 3 hours a year, but most of them more in dual credit. And then many, many more, because all of our career and tech ed programs include credentials, industry recognized credentials that students can earn at the end of those programs. So we're seeing a lot of interest and a lot of growth in all of these. Next slide, please. So some of our goals, it's in our Compass plan that we're investigating an ROTC program. So that is an example of something as we talk about what does our community want, what are our students interested in. One thing that we'd like to do more of is to collect some data and get some feedback from our students and our families of what kinds of programs would you like to see. So that's an example of one that we're looking at, and we'll see what else that data collection yields, and it may have us steer things in multiple directions. We would really love to expand all of our work-based learning experiences. So we've just started conversations, for example, with the community college about how we can access their workforce center to try to pair up students with job shadowing experiences or internship experiences. Our teachers are continuing to do a lot of outreach with industry partners to try to develop client projects. Our international business class this semester is partnering with an international organization that is going to pair our students with a small business in South America to help that business owner develop a marketing plan. So really cool stuff that's happening. I think actually they just today had their first Zoom call with the client there. And then what we really would like to get a grip on this year, especially with our new information system, is what's our baseline for Diploma Plus? So if we were to look at all of, for example, this year's 12th grade students, how many of them are achieving something on that Diploma Plus list? Where do we see room for growth? Where are we doing really well? And having that baseline data then will help us as we move forward be able to report out to our community of what kind of growth we're seeing with Diploma Plus. And then, of course, how we communicate that. And there are a lot of conversations happening, both related to the Success Ready Students Network, but also just here internally of how do we get that information out to our community in a digestible format, in a way that helps tell our story. Next slide. So our next steps, the Success Ready Students Network, there are some great districts that are resources there. A lot of this, what we call Diploma Plus, it took root in the Kansas City area many years ago, and so districts are further along in their journey, and so we've established some really great connections with other districts of where they started and how they got to where they are now, and it's helping us to navigate our own path here. We'd like to enhance our communication channels, as I mentioned, in particular, Just here within our own Lindbergh website, we've had some conversations about simple things like our course catalog and our career pathways and how we're communicating those to families. Just a couple of weeks ago, we asked our Teaching and Learning Board Advisory to review some samples from other districts and look at some websites and course catalogs and give us feedback about what did they like, what did they not like, what kind of features would they want to see on our website and in our documents about course planning or career planning with their students. And so that was really helpful as we look at how we can make it a little bit more navigable for our families. And then just continuing to build those community partnerships. So our teachers take on a lot of that. They're wonderful. They reach out to their connections to bring them into the classroom. They arrange field trips. I gave you the example of our international business and marketing class. Those kinds of things are happening every single day. And so I think it's just continuing to sustain those partnerships and try to get more of those experiences where our students can be embedded in those workplaces to feel what it's like to really be there. Any questions?
I have one. I was just curious, with the Diploma Plus, like what we have in place now, is there enough like sections or space for who wants to take it? Or are we having to tell kids no?
That's a great question. We don't really ever tell students no. I mean, I will say Dr. Cochran and his team work miracles with the schedule and how to staff certain things. Our goal is to never have to tell any student no. In fact, for example, the EMT program that we're creating here, because South Tech does have to tell students no, they have limited capacity there. We're hoping that some of those students will find a home here with our EMT program. I mean, certainly there are challenges. Every new program that we introduce is going to take that enrollment away from some other course somewhere in our high school. And so trying to strike the right balance is always going to be a challenge. But thus far, I can't think of an example where we have had to cap participation in any of those, aside from, with setting certain grade level requirements like the EMT program being only for seniors. So,
Thanks.
My question was about the internships. Are we finding that companies or businesses are open arms and yes, we would love to have your students? When we first started, there was a little bit of a challenge there, but how is that going?
So it is still challenging. Michelle Stortzum, our internships teacher, has successfully placed every student every year. They're not always necessarily landing in the exact thing that they were seeking an internship in. However, I still would say that the experience for them has been very positive, to be even in a related field. I don't want to speak for the teacher. I will say, I think one thing that she has run into and why we continue to try to build our database of potential internship hosts is that she's got some really strong relationships, but you can't go to the same people every single time. It's similar like with student teachers. You don't want to ask the same teacher every year to take a student teacher in their classroom. And so trying to build up a large enough database of employers to work with that we can, give people a year off here and there and kind of have a rotation of employers that we're working with. So I think people are more open than they were certainly like in the immediate post-pandemic phase. But it's challenging and it does take quite a bit of time to make those calls. And, sometimes students themselves are making those contacts because they have personal contacts where they would like to go work in an internship, and that's always great too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, then this is a great segue to invite, if we go to the next, Colin already did it, Dr. Eric Cochran, our high school principal, Nora Lafata, one of our science teachers, and Emily Holland, one of our math teachers from the high school, up to join me as we talk about the investigation we are doing. We actually had two Compass goals regarding investigating high school program. One, if you remember, last year when we were at MSBA, we saw a program with career academies, so we wanted to investigate what that looks like and determine how, if, why it could live within the Lindbergh High School world. And then also with our work with Success Ready Students Network and continuing to think differently about how students demonstrate mastery of learning, how we can embed credits together for students to be able to navigate high school in a different way. So we started, those are two separate Compass goals, but it made sense to come under the umbrella, I have to stop hitting my microphone, to come under the umbrella of one task force and study this together. So when we go to the next slide, I will give a brief overview of the process of this and then turn it over to Nora and Emily to talk about the site visits and our learning. And then Dr. Cochran will wrap up with where we are in terms of priorities. So whenever we do a task force like this, we always start with the design thinking process. So we want to start by kind of empathizing what is the current student experience? What are our challenges? What does the research say? And then we go through that process kind of defining what our priorities are, doing some deep learning so that we can make recommendations for future change. Where we are right now in this process, so we started off by having some of our task force members share what they observed in shadowing students. So as part of our teacher leadership cohort, teacher leaders shadow students and kind of get a sense of what does it feel like to be a high school student again? Because we might know it from the teacher perspective, but we don't feel it from the student perspective. And that is always a great place to start this conversation because it gives you a sense of how could we do better. And what are our opportunities? So we started there, and then we've been conducting site visits, attending conferences, trying to learn about different opportunities. And we are right now in the process where we have drafted our priorities, and we're going to continue to kind of work through how do we brainstorm or ideate what our potential solutions are to get to that point where we do make a recommendation. When we are ready to make a recommendation, our plan is to take that to the April Teaching and Learning Board Advisory for final feedback. Our goal with this is that anything that we recommend would not actually go into place until the 25-26 school year because it takes that long to develop it, get it in the Navigator, and then have it ready for students. Before I turn it over, the one thing I do want to say is this is a task force that is very teacher heavy. We have about 18 teachers on it. We also have parents, we have board members, we have a couple of students who have been great advocates for this work. But because there's a lot of capacity building that needs to happen, a lot of research, the teacher voice in this and understanding what's possible was a really important part of it. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the site visits that we are doing. Aurora Institute is at the forefront of innovative school programming, so we sent a couple of people to attend that. We had the opportunity to visit 5 schools in Chicago to see what kind of programming has developed and how we could take those ideas and incorporate them here. We have a group of 12 people who are going to the Institute for Personalized Learning, which is an opportunity to see competency-based learning in action. We'll get to tour 4 high school programs and learn from the experts in personalized learning as we do. And then we'll wrap up at the end of February, very beginning of March, with some visits to Kansas City schools who, as Ronnie mentioned, have been doing some of this work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nora and Emily to talk about these big themes, if you can go to the next slide, these big themes that we really found on our Chicago site visit.
Hello, I'm Nora Lafata, I'm a science teacher at the high school. Right? Yep, you're good. Okay. So we, in viewing these 5 schools, we got to see lots of different opportunities for like blended learning, integrated classes, which I'll talk about first. I guess I would describe integrated classes as being, so like the students basically experience multiple disciplines in one like cohort class. The day that we observed, they were working in a collaborative space together, and I don't remember if it was like a firm block schedule, but essentially they would spend about 3 to 5 hours working on, science, social studies, art, PE, health. I think it was everything but math, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay. And at New Trier High School, which is where we observed this, the program was called IGS, so Integrated Global Studies. And they would basically have, like a common curriculum, but multiple different content teachers contributing to it. And the students had more flexibility in a lot of different ways. The grading was different. They would typically have like a culminating type of project. They would go on field trips, do community outreach. In fact, one of the coolest things that I appreciated was in the rubrics on how the students were graded, I guess, or reflecting on their work, they had several different factors that went into it. So there's a rubric for like self-guided learning where the students were reflecting on their skills in terms of how well they could manage a process and how willing they were to take risks with their mastery and their creativity. There was a rubric just for habits of the mind, I think it was called. So how well students were able to react to setbacks or persevere. And so it wasn't simply just like your typical traditional grading system. It was more specific, and it was kind of molded to fit the goals for the various content and the teachers that were able to write it. So I thought that was really cool. There were different like projects and community outreach that they were doing. I believe the day that we were there, they had all read a common book, and we're practicing different ways of showing what they had learned. So there were posters up about poverty, and they had like a common journal. I think it was called like their home artifact. So all of the students were responsible for displaying what they had learned in the same type of experience in a different way. So I thought that was really neat. And they also had different like trips that they would take. I think, am I forgetting anything?
Like in terms of their schedule for a kid's day in this experience, they had, sorry, I'll move that. Between, one of the schools had 3 class periods that they had together. So instead of having a third, fourth, and fifth, I can count, I promise, class, they just had that one block of the day. One school did 3, one school did 5, and they had that many teachers paired with them, and the kids could rotate through different sections or do different either group or individual activities, just kind of depending upon the goals of the day. As we mentioned, the only content we didn't see covered was math, but they did do, as you can see, if they're English, social studies, health, art, bio, PE, just depending upon the program, and they could kind of weave that all together. I think the IGS program did English, art, and history.
And history, yeah.
And so they could do a lot together with those 3 content areas, and then the kids could get credit for each course, either individually, depending upon the school, they did it differently with either competencies, or they could get credits for 3 courses for those 3 hours they did in that program. It was very cool.
It was really cool.
Did they give you examples, like concrete examples of what the project was or how they were learning to kind of help visualize what this is, what this looks like?
A lot of them either did or said, like, just email us and we'll send you more. And so especially as we're investigating, we took like 1 million pictures. We have 2 here, but we took so many. And then I know we have all their contacts. So once we know more from all the site visits, to be able to get even more ideas.
Specific, yeah.
But at each school, we sat down with either teachers or students or both, and we're asking them for exactly that, because it's like, what does it look like?
So on one example, the artifact, like the journal, and I can't remember what they called it.
I think it was like a commonplace or
commonplace or like common home, and they had developed norms, like kind of what was expected, because it's a very personal thing. So on the outside, it was a journal, like hard copy or hardback, but everyone's looked different, and so they all went on the same field trip. But when I opened one girl's journal, and they were really sweet, I mean, they didn't mind us looking at it all, but hers was very artistic and like had a lot of drawings and sketches and like a comic strip to describe like what they observed on this trip, while another person's was more like an essay type, like written type of response, and another was like an interview, like a mock interview that they had made up. So they were all given freedom to like show what they had learned from this common thing that they all experienced in a way that made the most sense to them, which was really cool. And the norms that they developed were also neat. So just kind of similar to like PLC norms, like what's expected, how you'll treat each other, the best ways to give feedback, things like that, which was great.
From the teacher's perspective, do they have certain standards that they're just trying to prove or show that they met? That every teacher is saying, okay, well, this student is showing me in a comic strip, this is the standard they met, even though it looks different than the essay.
They had the rubrics that I believe they all developed together, and so the students would reflect on their own, like where they thought they were in the process, and they would perform interviews with the teachers like throughout. But I don't remember. I
can speak to this one, because this came up a lot when I would ask every one of them why they didn't do math, and a lot of it boiled down to there was no overlap in the math standards where there were in the other content areas. So they could be doing something that was like a history project, loop in that English and that art pretty flawlessly, whereas the math was trickier. So a lot of them did tie it to their state standards for everything, and then grade their own portion of this one assignment. If it was an essay or a project or whatever, they could all grade it and get a different thing from it as needed.
Was this a specific group within a school, or is this how the whole school operated?
So it was always a specific group. They would register for this course or series of courses. Each school, I mean, I think one school had 60 students participating, the other was about 100 students participating. And so it was always just a subset who specifically wanted this learning experience.
That type of learning
Exactly.
experience.
I believe they had to like apply and,
most of them.
yeah, like write some type of, reasoning why they wanted to be a part of the IGS program and then, interview and.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, and the career pathways. So I guess the way that I would distinguish between a career academy and an independent pathway is, we offer similar like independent pathways already. So the PLTW pathway where you have this tiered course progression and everybody who's in that process has to take the same classes in the same order. A career academy was, the one that we saw was really amazing. They had like a medical pathway, so they had the PLTW program, and I think it was Huntley High School. And then they offered, I think it was up to 30 classes within, that like medical umbrella. And so the PLTW classes were offered, but you didn't necessarily have to take all of them or go specifically in that direction. And the part that I found the most amazing was that it was so cross-curricular, and you had teachers in different disciplines collaborating and writing the curricula together. So there was a bioethics class where it was a science teacher and like a social studies teacher who had written the curriculum. You had, I don't think they had this, but I thought maybe like a pharmacology class because we could include math. A kinesthetics class where it was science and PE. So there was a lot more opportunity for students to get more specific to what interests them while still being, under that career. And, not that the independent pathways are limiting, but they do kind of pigeonhole kids. And so the career academies offered like a broader perspective and just more flexibility, which was great. And then they had different ends. So some of the schools that we talked to wanted, a seal, or there was like a certificate type of incentive for students. Another school, and I think it was the last school, Barrington, they said they didn't really want to provide anything on the transcript. They didn't want kids to how do they explain that? Like, if they don't want to.
They wanted to encourage kids to adventure and try what they wanted, and if they decided they didn't want it, pivot. So they didn't want to pigeonhole them, like, well, I've done 3 of these classes, I have to finish this. And so they wanted them to be able to try and kind of go in those different ways instead of just feeling like, well, now I'm in the medical academy, so here I am.
And so, one of my students last year in the biomed program, she was taking the classes because they were most closely related to what she wanted to do, but she didn't actually want to go into like medicine. She wanted to be like a graphic designer for like medical textbooks. And so this to me would be perfect if you had some type of like science art crossover, which is something that I had not even ever considered as a career. So I just thought it was really awesome that there was such a broad outreach, and it wasn't just like these 4 classes in this order. There were also different, there was one class at Barrington where it was taught by like a CNA, and they had volunteer, like mandatory volunteer hours. So all the students taking those classes had to offer so many hours at a nursing home per semester. And the day that we were observing them, they were learning about like the different like food consistencies, like puree versus minced versus finely minced, and they were practicing like feeding each other. So, it was just really neat. I was just like overwhelmed, like how impressed I was with all of it, so.
One thing I liked about the medical academy, when the students were in it, wasn't just the coursework that the medical academy encouraged, they also encouraged, they had to get a certain number of points to graduation to get, I think it was a tassel or something, or the stamp, or what, this was a school that did do the stamp on their transcript. And so they had to do coursework, but then they had to do internships and volunteer hours and things like that. So it really brought in the full experience of kids. And they just gave them a point total, like you have to reach, I'm gonna make up a number, 200 points by graduation, and courses were worth points and internships and everything. So they could create that experience for themselves and then get that recognition at the end and stamp their transcript and whatever they wanted to do with that, which also lets them kind of target their interests instead of just take the classes I told you to take and go from there.
Is this something that starts at the higher levels, or do even freshmen have this opportunity? Because at some point you have to have some core classes, I would think.
Freshmen did have the opportunity, and so there were like prerequisites basically. Then you could branch out from there or take even in PLTW, so you can take some classes concurrently, but yeah, I don't know. Freshmen could do it.
And the cool thing with like their medical ethics class, I think that was a history credit. And so they did some of those where it was in their medical academy, but you could get a math credit or a history credit or an English credit. We just did your English class through that vein, or your history, or whichever one it was, whatever they had created for it.
I'm thinking, because the one school wasn't sure about the transcript, or they reflected it a different way, this actually would be really cool on those college resumes, or different additional documents you have to fill out when you're applying to colleges.
Absolutely.
Set you apart from the other applicants.
Well, that was one of the things, this goes back to the IGS program, but we asked them, so since they could do competency grading instead of transcript grades in the previous 2 slides ago, one of the things we asked, like, do colleges care about that? Like, does that look negatively? And they, from their experience, and this was New Trier High School, they had not heard back negatively from any of their students or parents or the colleges, because they would send a different transcript that was more reflective and showed all of the other standards of self-learners and things like that on there. And so from their vantage point, it actually did work as a positive for their students.
All right. We didn't go to see blended learning, but we did see a little bit of blended learning. Let's just do a quick summary of that before we wrap up the priorities.
In short, the blended was mostly so a student could choose to take a class blended or traditional. If they chose to do it blended, their attendance was not actually a daily attendance. They would be in or out of the classroom based on either their grades or data or different projects they were working on. So maybe Mondays they're in class, and then Tuesday, half of the students come in and the other half can work independently, whether on campus or off campus, just depending upon the program. And then the teachers could do interventions, they could do debates, they could do conferencing, just different things with the students actually in the room that other students worked kind of asynchronously wherever. That's the short. I can summarize.
All right, so I've got the last slide, and you can probably already tell, so after we got back from Chicago, we met as a group again with the whole committee, and you are not surprised that as we tried to generate some priorities for that particular group, and you listen to the great examples that were given here by our outstanding teachers, that we gravitated towards 2 things, first of all, and number 1 being that cross-curricular learning opportunities that we saw a lot of, which is very much real world. It's rare that the siloed content areas that are traditional in a high school are practiced in silos in the real world. They are blended together, and so that is very much a real world application. And then trying to find those career pathways for our students, which, again, a lot of that work has already started at the high school. The nice thing now for me, and I will say, going on site visits to me is by far the best professional learning that I ever get to do. I'm not sure how I feel about going to Milwaukee in February, but I will come back and let you know how I feel about it after I've been there. But without question, it's interesting to me that I've done this now for a long time, and at the early stages of going on these site visits, I kind of felt like, oh wow, I feel like I've gone to a completely different planet. I didn't know any of these things were things, because I've never seen them practiced anywhere. And the nice thing now about these most recent visits is that it really feels to me like some of these things that we are seeing, some of the cross-curricular learning and some of the career pathways are very much attainable, because you're seeing the roots of that already taking place with the work that people like Dr. Zagora has done at the high school to get us going in the right direction, and all the work that our teachers are doing and some of the ideas that they bring to the table. And then the final priority that we articulated as a group really is making sure that we are thoughtful and that we are taking our time to ensure that whatever ultimately, because we still have other more learning to do as we go other places, and we've got more meetings ahead of us with this particular program. Hopefully in this program we will learn that math does matter. I hope. Chicago did not show us that, but we're hoping to see that other places. But one of the things that everyone really, when we visited Chicago, who are maybe a little further down the road on some of these projects, stated was, take your time, make sure that what you are building is a sustainable program, that it's going to be something that is successful. And like I said, I really feel that we've done a lot of the groundwork already to kind of get us going in the right direction.
What did the students you talked to have to say about these experiences?
So we did talk to a biased source because they all applied to do it. But they overall loved that experience. That's how they wanted to learn. They could make connections better. We had students at one school, they could only do it their freshman year, and they were very sad that they couldn't do it after that. That school didn't offer it after freshman year, and so they were upset about it. But that was honestly one of the best parts, was talking to them and hearing like, so this makes sense to you, and like seeing how we could do it in our day and actually factor it in. That was huge. They overall loved it.
One of the students that I spoke with said that it made him excited to come to school again. So I think for a lot of kids that don't necessarily, love the like sitting in a classroom every day with the same people, same atmosphere, it really helps them and supports them in all the right ways. And that was like the best comment that I heard the whole time. So that was really neat.
Thank you. Excellent job representing our work so far. And thanks for coming on I almost said Tuesday night, it's a Thursday night. If we can progress, you already did that. I'm going to really quickly let you know that there is another task force that I am also leading simultaneously. We're looking at secondary gifted programming, so it's following the same process. We're not quite as far. We are starting site visits actually over the next 3 weeks. But we're looking at programming for secondary gifted, evaluating things. We've gotten feedback around our middle school program and how we alternate LEAP with PE. We've been able to survey students, parents, teachers, really grab a lot of information. So I know we're a little short on time tonight, so I'm not going to go into all that detail, but we are following a similar process to make recommendations in the same timeline as the previous task force. And with that, I want to invite Dr. Shariah Mason up. She is going to marry our work between teaching and learning and human resources. And as she's coming up, the Success Ready Student Network, just a quick update, we're continuing to progress in our work. Actually, tomorrow is a major work day in terms of dashboard development, alternative APR, or the annual performance report, which I'll talk a little bit more about in our regular board meeting tonight. So a lot of work is happening there. We've got principals engaged in professional learning through different virtual seminars that they've signed up for, and we'll kind of consolidate that learning all together this summer. So still a lot of progress happening with the Success Ready Students Network in terms of growing our work, meeting our goals for the future. And now I officially turn it over to Shariah, who I'm going to look at and apologize and say we're way over our allotted time, so as expeditiously as possible. Thank you.
Now it's on. Okay. Well, good evening. I'm excited to give you my updates. Our goal is to cultivate a culture of belonging and dignity for all staff and students in the district. And one of the ways that we do that is through restorative practice trainings. And so it's pretty much just a framework in order to build community in classrooms and to resolve conflict. And so two of the tools that I use throughout the trainings are giving teachers the tools to implement community building circles successfully in their classrooms. And then with harm circles, it's just a protocol to kind of mitigate conflict. One of the activities that we do throughout the training is I will ask staff and students to draw a representation of what restorative practices means to them. And so the pictures that you see here are a few of those examples. The yellow one is an example from a few of our staff. I love it. It's simple, but the message is exactly what restorative practices means. It means I see you and I hear you. I'm giving you a space to authentically talk about who you are and honor you. One of the student ones that really stood out to me, and it's not pictured here, but it was an example of a couple students playing on one side of the poster. And then there was one little girl on the opposite side of the poster, and there was a line that was drawn next to her. And I was asking the students, what does that line represent? And they said that it was the invisible wall, and how with restorative practices, we are hopefully cultivating environments where students feel safe enough and vulnerable enough to be able to chip away at that invisible wall and kind of let us into who they are. Next slide. All right, so with the training framework, we kind of changed it a little bit this year. We still have 2 full days of training. However, half of one of the day's trainings will be dedicated to just belonging and dignity. training. And then the other day and a half will be centered around the implementation of restorative practices and just the framework in general. I was also able to do a few more requested professional developments that were specifically geared towards our community ed and rec department, our counselors, and our gifted department. When it comes to some of the staff work in our district, I wanted to highlight a few of these, specifically our equity champions. My main goal with this group this year was to diversify the people within that group. And so last year was a group full of women. And so this year we wanted to make sure that we got some men at the table. And then we also wanted to ensure that we had some SSD staff present as well. And so I'm happy to say that we've been able to successfully do that this year as we continue to grow with that group. With our instructional coaches, a book that we're going to focus on this year is Unearthing Joy. And the book is pretty much centered around rethinking the way that we look at genius. And one of the examples in the book it talks about is the work of hair braiding and how those intricate designs that they use take the same precision as a surgeon about to do a surgery. And so we really need to rethink the way that we prioritize and think about what genius is, so that way all of our students feel valued in whatever genius that they represent. And it also talks about implementing joy into the curriculum as well. And so how many times throughout the day are we ensuring that our students have some autonomy or voice and choice over their learning? How are we infusing joy and fun things into the classroom? And so I'll be working with our instructional coaches on that. And then the last thing that I want to highlight is our SSD and Lindbergh partnership. And so I've been able to work with Dr. Macklin, and we've been able to attend a few trainings where we talk about inclusive language and collaboration. And so instead of saying those students or your student, it is all of our students. And so we need to work on that language and how we can work more collaboratively together as a unit. Next slide. All right, so some of the student work that I'd like to highlight is starting off with our Early Child Care Education Center or Childhood Education Center. We've been really focusing on diverse texts, and so I've been able to do a few read-alouds in a few classrooms, which has been really fun. And then also in February with our District Equity Committee, we'll be conducting an equity walk at ECE. And so we'll be able to see some of their equity initiative highlights and some areas where we might need to grow. At the elementary level, we're still focusing on restorative circles, and then also focusing on literacy. And so I've been able to assist Dr. Valter. She's starting from Stories to Service, where we're able to kind of pick culturally diverse books and kind of give each grade level, kind of norm the text that we'll use at each grade level, so that way each grade level kind of gets the same experience. At the middle school, we're still doing restorative circles, and then also we've been focusing on some safe zone signage, and so ensuring that, especially when we think about our students who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community, that they have safe and trusted adults that they can go to if they need them. And then also still focusing on culturally diverse texts and making sure that our libraries are equipped with diverse texts that represent all of our students. And then finally, at the high school level, we've been able to, I've been able to do some work with, in regards to Equity Night. And so their topic is going to be accessible post-secondary education. And so making sure that all of our students know their options and being able to assist those clubs with being able to highlight that in an equitable way for all of our students. Next slide. All right, when it comes to our social emotional learning and belonging data, I wanted to highlight our elementary assessment tool, which is SABRS. And so from our teacher assessments that were given on behalf of our students, we see that there's 14% of our students who are at some risk or high risk. And then with the MySABRS student assessment tool, which is 2nd grade through 5th grade, they're at about 16% students who are at some risk or high risk. With that assessment, they highlight topics such as cooperation, social acceptability, engagement, independence, positivity, and resilience. And so that really kind of goes back to our restorative practice framework when we're kind of implementing those community building circles, really being intentional about throwing these topics in there. So if we have a student who's really struggling with resilience, this could be some data that we use in order to kind of implement that topic in our circle for the day. When it comes to our secondary assessment, which is Panorama, I really kind of looked at the supportive relationships component. We had 86% of our students, and this covers our middle school and high school, who responded favorably to having supportive relationships. However, when I dug a little bit deeper, most of the questions that had about a 90+ percentage were questions centered around, do you have a supportive adult at home that you trust, that you can be your authentic self with? Or do you have a supportive friend at school that you can be your authentic self with? And so the ones who had the least percentage of responded favorably were the ones you see here. Do you have a teacher or other adult from school that you can be completely yourself around? Or do you have a teacher or other adult from school who you can count on to help you no matter what? And so when it comes to restorative practices and dignity and belonging, we really want to give our teachers the tools to be able to create spaces where students feel like they can go to them if they're having any difficulties or struggles. Next slide. All right. This is pretty much some of the affinity group work that I've been working on. And so last year we started our Lindbergh Staff of Color Affinity Group. As you can see, we're at like 6% staff of color in our district. And so this group was really important for me to start because I really want to give them a safe, supportive space where they know that their work is honored and they know that they can get mentored or get the support that they need in order to thrive here in Lindbergh. And so once we get them in our district, we want to make sure that we can keep them, and this is one way that we can do that. This year, we also started our Lindbergh Elementary Male Staff Affinity Group. As you can see here on the left side of the screen, we have about 11% males that work at our elementary schools. The national average is about 19.5%. We're at 11, and so we're really doing, especially our boys, a disservice if they don't have an opportunity to have a male teacher at some point throughout their K-5 experience here in the district. All right, and now I think we'll talk about some of our equity initiatives within HR.
Good job.
Thank you, and you can stay right there, Dr. Mason. I'll invite up Dr. Cavato. I know that we're running short on time, so if you'll just settle in, I'd like to take you through about 85 slides to cover the Human Resources Department. We'll go quick, though. It's not going to be too bad.
Hang on one second. Any questions for Shariah before, off of her work in schools and with students and teachers? Anybody?
I'll be quick. When you look at the SABRS and Panorama data, do you look at that by student population to see if our diverse students are scoring differently than our non-diverse students?
I second that question.
Yeah. Yes, and so I definitely need to dig into it a little bit more, but there is a difference in the way that some of our students from other subgroups respond when it comes to like having an adult that they trust or having a teacher that they trust. And I think that really attributes to having a teacher that looks like you. Sometimes it's difficult to be in an environment where you know it's inherently safe, but you don't really know if you totally belong. And so yes, I can definitely get you more information on that, but I definitely need to dig into it a little bit deeper.
So as you're aware, diversity initiatives, inclusion, equity and diversity initiatives, they cover both staff and students. And we have worked closely with Dr. Mason, focusing on employee belonging as well as hiring practices through the diversity and equity committee at the district level. So turn it over to Dr. Mason, Dr. Cavato to talk about a couple of those initiatives in the human resources segment.
I had just one quick question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
I know you had your hand up.
You were
Talked right over you.
The equity night from CAP, is that scheduled yet for this year? Do we know when that is?
Laura might have a little bit more information on that if you want to share, but
Am
I
I
believe it's
stealing
March 2nd.
your
I know a
thunder?
little bit about it. It's still a little bit up in the air. I'm pretty sure the date right now is April 2nd, but that could be up to change. It's still kind of far out, but that's the date for right now.
Thank you.
All right, well, like Dr. McKinney said, Dr. Mason and I have partnered this year on a couple of our HR initiatives, and I'll just go ahead and let us lead right into it. So we can go on to the next slide, Colin. Thank you.
Okay, so we've been really working on a diversity collaborative hiring event. We've been partnering with Kirkwood, Webster Groves, and Maplewood Richmond Heights. And we've been kind of working on this for the last 3 months. Our goal is to recruit diverse candidates, both certified and classified. With this event, we are hoping that we can give participants an opportunity to learn about all 4 of the school districts. We'll be conducting on-the-spot job interviews, as well as creating a diverse applicant pool, so like creating a database that we can all pull from. And this year, it'll be held in Kirkwood, and we are hoping that next year we can hold it here at Lindbergh High School. And so the idea is that every year, one of the districts will host the event. This year, the date is February 24th, from 9 to 12 noon. This is, next slide. This is the flyer for the event. Next slide. With our district initiatives, especially with our district equity committee, we have the HR subcommittee, and the work is pretty much going to be centered around cultivating more belonging into our hiring process. And so when we think about our values as a district, when we think about the expectations and the behaviors that we want to see and candidates that we want to hire here, we really want to make sure that they are contributing to that sense of belonging, contributing to being able to work with a diverse group of students and staff members.
So one of the pieces that I brought to Dr. Mason was I wanted a portion of our job description, every job description that we have, to reflect the learning the district has participated in with dignity and belonging, and also our values and beliefs. So whenever an individual applies for a job at Lindbergh Schools, what does that look like? So 3 of our team, our committee, will look at 3 topics, and one of the topics would be on the job description, honoring a sense of belonging. Well, what does that expectation look like? That means in the workplace, I demonstrate respect for my colleagues of all backgrounds, cultures, and identities. And not just what is an expectation and what do we want, what does the behavior look like when you're at work? So that is seeking to understand and appreciate people from different backgrounds and different perspectives. So again, just one of the pieces we want to add to job descriptions and tie in the work that Dr. Mason and the Teaching and Learning Department has been involved in the last couple of years, and we'll bring it into HR. And those are the 2 books that we will focus on. I know as a district, we did a book study and quite a bit of work with dignity and belonging, but there's also a book that our committee, our HR subcommittee will work with called Belonging at Work. And what does belonging at work look like whenever you're hired at Lindbergh Schools?
Lastly, before questions, I would just say this is an example, the job fair is an example of the investigate, research, and then implement process. It started as an investigate with when Dr. Mapp was here. Clayton and Ladue are having a similar event. We got to study that, attend that, see what that looked like, and a lot of this work is based on that. So this is a good example of how that investigate, research, implement process works, and it has in this case. Any questions about the HR side of inclusion and equity and diversity initiatives? All right. Thank you, Dr. Mason.
Thank you.
We're going to keep Dr. Cavato up, and we are going to introduce tonight Chief of Police at Crestwood, Missouri, John Williams. Thank you for joining us this evening. And some exciting news. One of our initiatives has to do with the addition of an SRO at the elementary level. Very exciting. Sorry, Randy. Randy Jimerson, our Director of Safety Security, is also going to be joining us at the panel. So I will turn it over to Mr. Jimerson to talk about this initiative.
Colin, you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide?
You guys don't mind if I don't?
People it up. We're
Oh,
recording, yeah.
All right.
There you go. Yeah.
All right. So again, you know, we brought this to the attention. It just kind of came to our attention. I'm always about adding to what we already have in place. The recent incident that we had back in September with the escapee obviously, you know, raised some concerns, and we had looked at several different ways that we could be better prepared for those type of situations, and one of those being is the possibility of adding on another SRO. We have 2 currently, one that's full-time at the at the high school, and one that splits his time between both middle schools. and which is has done well, but we could always, again, add to that. So some early discussions started with Crestwood PD, and they've been, in chief, and has been more than welcoming of the idea. And so we're looking towards trying to add a third SRO, and so then we would split the schools up. If you guys can go back to the previous
Back a
slide.
slide, there you go.
Yeah. We're gonna be splitting the schools up. So we'll still have Officer Loban at the high school full-time, which basically covers the high school idea center and the early childhood education. Then with the addition of a third SRO, we'd have Officer Holtzman, who's also from St. Louis County. He would then be covering Kennerly, Dressel, Concord, and Sparing. And then adding on that other SRO would then cover Long, Crestwood, Sappington, EC West, and Truman. So that would give us just better coverage overall with, anything that's going on at those schools. And I mean, our SROs do, I don't know what we would do without them. I mean, Officer Loban alone at the high school takes care of a lot. So we definitely keep them gainfully employed. So we would love the thought of having a third one added on.
Yeah, kind of talk about the timeline. So in November, Dr. Cavato and her team reached out to us, discussing a kind of low-level thing about their vision about adding another SRO. I've always had interest. I've been at the department now for 3 years and had interest in expanding our relationship with the schools. So it felt natural, and in the last couple of years hasn't been a good time for us, just with some of our personnel, but I think right now we're in the right spot. We've got some great people who would do great at this position. So we had some discussions about it, and it really moved into some more high-level discussions about let's go ahead and try to proceed with this. We've created, by doing some research kind of nationally with some different organizations, the federal government, on best practices for SRO, came up with a very detailed job description for the SRO. And then we're in the process now of reviewing an MOU created by the school district that really kind of covers our roles and responsibilities between the police department and the school district itself on the positions. So the draft is with us. We're reviewing it. Lawyers are reviewing it. But I think in probably the next week or two, we'll probably have that final version of the MOU, which I think is very detailed and really follows the best practices nationwide for SROs. If the board passes the budget and this is included in it, our timeline for that would be, we would be selecting an SRO in March. I do, and I've already expressed this, I want the school district to select that person. We will open it up within the department. We'll come up with probably, I would assume, probably 2 or 3 people who would be interested. I already have some people in mind who I think would succeed at it. So, and then we want the interview to be done by the school district, and you guys make the selection, because I think it's very important that the school district picks the right person. We're doing it that early. This would be for next school years, but we have to get them through some certain trainings. So basic SRO school, school safety officer through the state of Missouri, some kind of legal requirements that we'll have to follow for training. So that's why we're doing it early. Those trainings are typically in the summer. And so we'll get whoever is selected trained up by definitely July, and then they'd be beginning in August.
Next slide. So another thing that is it going? Yeah. Another thing I forgot to mention, also that reminded me when we were discussing MOUs. So if there's a question on whether or not, so the schools that are going to fall under that Crestwood SRO are within either, Crestwood already. Obviously, there's the issue with Truman, but Chief's already worked that out with Chief Dodge of Sunset Hills. But there will also be an MOU between Crestwood and St. Louis County, so that even if, say, there's an event or something happens at Lindbergh or one of these other schools that are outside of Crestwood, that officer can still respond to those, and there won't be any kind of conflict of interest there. In terms of what we're looking at moving forward, again, with 24, 25, I'm not one to hold things off. If I see some things need to get addressed, they get addressed immediately, instead of trying to forecast what I'm going to do a year out. I'm going to kind of take care of things as they come. But with adding that extra SRO, we're gonna, again, that will allow students who have that officer, and we don't know, 100% how long these officers will be here, but it will allow them to kind of grow with that officer when they start in the early years, at kindergarten through 5th grade, and then it'll also be the same officer that they're with that in the middle school, and they won't be till they get to the high school level that they're seeing somebody new. So that, again, it gives them a good, relationship with law enforcement, period. That officer, and again, with just the 2 that we've had now, they have a good relationship with the children of all ages. And I just think them being able to follow them through that process all the way through 8th grade will go over well.
Any questions from the security team or Chief Williams? Thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks.
Okay, if not, thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Quickly, I'd like Ann Worthen, our Director of Benefits, to come up, and Jessica Franklin. And we also have one of our counselors here. There you are. Good to see you this evening, and we're going to talk about, sorry, I got my slides mixed up here, so I'm a little off the cuff here. This panel is going to talk a little bit about return on investment for our wellness program. So wellness does cost money, and sometimes it's difficult to see, but we have some data that they're going to share tonight that talks about how we can see return on investment from our wellness program.
Colin, can you go to the next slide? And the next slide. All right, there
Yes,
we go.
yeah.
I know, hey, I got it.
We're getting
We're
close,
going.
so,
We're getting
yes,
close.
all right.
So, the very first piece that I'm just going to share is Health Source Solutions is one of the companies that we work with for mental health and overall well-being. This year we have 3 goals, and our goals have been to promote the well-being experience at Lindbergh Schools to employees to increase our utilization. Also messaging and communication, so the RX and Go tools, and then also well-being checkups for employees. All of these things, again, will promote positive health. And also, when you look at positive health and healthy employees, that also reflects, on our medical fund as well that we look at. So that was one of our goals. And our third goal was to increase the work that we do with our well-being advocates at the building. Colin, you want to go to the next slide?
I need to jump in just quickly. I was going through that way too fast. Tina Christinell's here from Sparing Middle School. I'm sorry I didn't introduce her more
I
carefully.
was getting
Sorry,
ready
Tina.
to introduce her
Okay, I'm
next, so
sorry.
you got it.
No worries.
So that leads into, our last goal was to increase the involvement of our well-being advocates. So they do quarterly meetings with us here at Central Office, and we Zoom in with Health Source Solutions, and they provide all the resources and tools for our advocates to share out at the building level. And Tina is one of our awesome advocates from Spearing, and I'm gonna let her share out some of the great things Spearing's doing.
Yes. Yes, so we do, is it on?
Oh,
Okay.
it's on.
So yes, I am one of Sparing school counselors, but then I'm also one of the well-being advocates at Sparing for the employees. Yes, I do feel like that is a great resource, the Health Source Solutions. They're good, they're there if there's questions. We have incentives we can earn, and teachers can earn like $100 for just doing the right healthy choice things. And they're always there for questions for us as well as provide information and give us ideas of things to initiate good programs at Sparing. We also at Sparing, they suggested we do a survey, so we did a survey for Sparing. So we do things in our building. We were lucky enough to get a spot with LEAP moving out. I heard that from a previous thing, that we have a Zen Den at our building now, which is great. There's another advocate besides myself, and we do things like walks every Wednesday morning, offer a before and after school thing every Wednesday for the staff, where they can earn like kudos points that can work towards their $100 incentive. We do things, we send out weekly Wednesday notes to say that new initiatives we're doing. We've offered pickleball. This is all from the survey results of what people in the building thought they'd be interested in. So the staff, like pickleball, things for staff. We're currently doing Biggest Loser, and then healthy recipe shares. Yep.
She's being very subtle. I met with Dr. Boger yesterday and her team to go over their well-being initiatives, and we went over their climate and culture survey that the staff took, and one of their highest ratings was well-being, and their jump with overall everyone's feelings at work and sense of belonging and feeling good about being at work. And Dr. Boger complimented the well-being program and the initiatives from the advocates attributing to the growth in those scores. So you're being humble.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Right. All right, next slide, Colin. So the other piece for mental well-being is we've been able to provide resources to our principals to where they can help our employees whenever they come in and they request resources or they're struggling or they just have a lot of questions. So now we have put together a toolkit for supervisors that's at their fingertips. Where used to they would have to call HR, or they'd have to call Ann with benefits or our EAP provider. Now we've been able to meet with principals and give them a toolbox, and they're equipped and prepared. All right, next up, I believe, is Ann.
Navigate is the platform that we use to track all of our employees' activities toward wellness. And it's also the platform that we use to track their activities toward their incentives. And the incentives are provided actually through a fund from United Healthcare. They provide $20,000 to us every year to give these incentives to our employees through this wellness program, which is great. And I know the numbers are really tiny on this, but just a few numbers that I wanted to point out is that we are at 48% of our employees and spouses who are actually registered within the portal. The industry standard is about 25%, so we're really well above the industry standard on that. Actually, 65 employees earned 150 points or more within our portal, which is not even funded through our incentives. We stop at 100 points, so it does kind of give a little bit of a hint toward the fact that the Navigate portal is actually something that engages our employees, I would say. We did log about 140 annual wellness exams and about 205 additional age-appropriate preventive exams in 2023. That includes like mammograms and colonoscopies and things of that nature. We are increasing our incentives toward those types of prevention exams in 2024, which we hope will just increase those numbers, which equate to what would be our return on investment, which would be dollars back into our medical fund due to reduced claims, hopefully, more well people, and probably, hopefully, lower human capital costs due to less work hours missed. So we are very happy with the Navigate tracking platform. I believe our advocates are very happy with it. And those numbers are really, I guess, something that reflects on our advocates too in the communication that they do with their employee groups. So we do appreciate everything that they do. Next slide. So the next platform that I'm just going to talk about here is CuraLink. They are our provider for employee assistance. And just as a little synopsis, employee assistance provides things such as mental health counseling, financial guidance, legal guidance, and then we do have a package of supervisor resources within that also to support effective management and leadership of employees within that portal also. The counseling provided through that portal too is provided in multiple different ways, either via in-person, video, text, and video support groups. So they do have many ways that you can access the counseling. In the third quarter of 2023, we had 19 occasions where we had cases opened through CuraLink, which is double the cases from the second quarter of 2023. So we were pretty happy with the amount of activity through the portal. And then the top concern was personal stress and anxiety, which is not surprising. That's pretty much across the board right now. And then of all the cases that had come through the portal, 100% of those cases were resolved within what the support link offers, which does save us money because those claims do not come through the United Healthcare claims. So again, savings on that end. They estimate for us what the return is in savings, not having claims come through our medical provider. And in 2023, we are expected to save about $115,000 given the cases that we've resolved through the CareLink portal. So we're pretty happy with that also. Again, communication's been great from all of our business partners, and our advocates have been great with that. So,
Colin, next slide. Jesse, healthiest employer.
All right, and then I'll be very brief. We just wanted to highlight that through all of our work over the last couple of years in building up the well-being program, we decided to apply for the Healthiest Employer Award. It's an award that recognizes organizations that are people-first organizations that promote taking a proactive approach in employee health. The recipients of the award are determined in different categories based on the size of the employee groups. So there are 5 different categories, and we got second place in our size category our first year applying. So we were very excited about that.
Well, any questions for the wellness team? They worked hard. It's money in the bank, which is important. If not, I'm going to save my last piece for the Friday packet, and that's it for HR.
Can I ask a real quick question? For the EAP, how do the employees know that that's staying confidential? Because there's a lot of stats here that are high level, but they're personal.
how do employees know that it's confidential? I mean, HIPAA laws require it.
Yeah, and
but-
it's in the language too, so when they access the site, there's a lot of language that says this is, we get data on visits, but we don't have any idea who it is,
We don't get any data on names or anything of that nature. So sometimes we get, whether it's like male or female or things that are very high level, but other than that, that's it.
Yeah, our data is basically raw and generic in nature. It's not individualized at all.
And then we're also going to put Beth's information to you in the Friday packet as well.
Well, and if I can say one really quick thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
Most of my goals I was looking through as we're talking refer to something you've already heard tonight. And so, a lot of our work is supporting all of these goals. So you'll see that in there, but let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn Board Workshop 1589?
So moved.
Motion by Andrew,
Second.
second by Matt. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Board Workshop 1589 is adjourned.